Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Book Passion. It is I, Eileen Cook, with my new sexy voice that I'm trying out, which maybe goes well with this book. I don't know. But tonight we're talking about a nonfiction book. It's Mary Roach's Bonk. So, show of hands, how many people read the book? All right. So the two people on the couch did not. So it'll be
I want to read the book.
You definitely, I think you want to read the book. So of those of you who read it, did you like it? I guess I want to start with that. I'm curious. Donna, I'll start with you.
I loved it. I loved it so much. When books say they're laugh out loud funny, and I'm always disappointed if I laugh 3 times. It's like, that's not a laugh out loud funny book. That's just a normal book. This one, the thing that got me most were all of the footnotes. I loved this book. I loved it so much I bought Spook, which I haven't read yet.
She has written several other books. Her first book was Stiff, which is about death. Spook, which is about the afterlife. Packing for Mars, which is about space. Grunt, which is about people at war. And Gulp, which is all about digestion, strangely enough. Kit, what did you think as someone who read it?
I listened to it on audio, but I loved it. It was laugh out loud funny over and over. It was really wonderful. The only thing I would say is, if you do listen to it on audio, probably not in the car driving to Toronto with your husband.
Maybe that's exactly when you should be doing it.
Well, I kind of thought so at first, but then, I don't know, it felt like he was feeling like I was playing it on purpose. Like, I really didn't know what to expect, but it was quite funny how it turned out.
Yeah. Sorry, I just want to say, I'm about to go on a 3-day, 24-hour road trip with Dave, and maybe that would be the perfect thing because he loves listening to podcasts.
I think it would be very funny, especially if you warn him ahead of time. My husband didn't know what book we were listening to, just that it was going to be a book club book. And then all of a sudden they're talking about male and, the lack of libido and the older male and all this kind of stuff. And I'm looking at him.
Did he have a hard time with the penile enhancement surgery?
Exactly.
They degloved the little penis.
It was hilarious, though. I love the science. I love the fact that I learned something, was totally amused by her writing, her double entendre, her puns. I thought they were clever.
Speaking of, one of her puns, one of my favorite is, I highlighted a few lines. So one of them is, this is the chapter where she's talking about masturbation. I may be dating myself, and in brackets, a turn of phrase that now strikes me as a euphemism for masturbation. Which I was quite liked about that. Yeah, she has a lot of asides that are just really lovely.
The way she's talking about these things so naturally, is like a scientific journal report. And that's what I found so funny. And especially in the recording, if you hear the recording, I can play a little bit for you later, but the recording, it was brilliantly done.
Does she read it herself?
I don't think so.
The chapter that I remember the most, so I read this about 1.5 years ago. The one that still strikes me is that she signed herself and her husband up to go into was it an MRI machine and have sex and she didn't, did she tell him? She didn't really tell him what she was signing him up for.
He did agree to it. And you'll actually see, I talk about later, I think one of the things that I love about her writing and about the book is that she does put herself into all the, it feels like she's telling you about all the things.
This is Audible.
You know who else does that really well? Another one of my co-favorite authors, because Mary Roach, that one book has put her up at the top of my list, is A.J. Jacobs.
Yes.
He writes like her, or she writes like him, whenever they write similarly.
She did get a star review from Kirkus for this book. Her books have done critically extraordinarily well. The only real critique I could find, so there are some people who just don't like the subject matter, so fair enough. The New York Times said at times she can be, quote, almost too curious, unquote. And I think that somehow has to do with, which I would say you could take as a critique, is it's a very meandering book. Like there's not a clear through line into, like you can pick it up and put it down at almost any different chapter. It's almost like a collection of science articles. So if you're looking for a nonfiction book that's going to read more like a novel, or is going to have, a kind of a clear thesis statement to it, this one isn't it. This is honestly, and I think all of her books sort of follow this, is just this thing where there is something that she finds interesting, and then she's going to go find out stuff about it. So I'm going to read for Bonnie and Leslie, who didn't have a chance to read the book, something that comes from very early in the book where she's talking about it. And she's basically talking about when science started, they would study animals as a way of studying human behavior because they weren't really necessarily doing anything about this. So there's this video that she watches from, I think it's the 1940s, of two porcupines having sex and how porcupines have sex. And so in case you're wondering, they don't face on, which you might think, but the female flops her tail over her pokey bits so that he does not become impaled. And she says, here is another fact that Shaddle discovered by watching Prickles, Johnny, Pinky, Maudie, Nighty, and Old Dad, which is the name of the things, in the University of Buffalo porcupine enclosure. One of the males, when sexually aroused, would rear up on his hind legs and tail and walk erect towards the female with his penis fully erected. She has in brackets, why do I suspect this is the one called Old Dad? This is what was followed by what Shady describes as an unusual urinary shower, the particulars of which I shall spare you. Additionally, an amorous porcupine may then hop about on one front leg and the hind legs while holding the other front paw on his genitals. My point being that if you want to understand human sexual response, then studying animals is probably not the most productive way to go about it. So I'm curious, how many people think she comes from a science background? It was my assumption that she did, but she actually doesn't. She has no scientific training whatsoever. And I actually pulled her bio because I thought it was kind of interesting. I grew up in a small house in Etna, New Hampshire. My dad was 65 when I was born. My neighbors taught me how to drive a skidoo and shoot a rifle, though I never made much use of those skills. I graduated from Wesleyan in 1981 and drove out to San Francisco with friends. I spent a few years working as a freelance copy editor before landing a half-time PR job at the San Francisco Zoo. My office was a trailer next to the Gorilla World. On the days when I wasn't taking calls about elephant wart removal surgery or denying rumors that the cheetahs had been sucked dry by fleas, I would write freelance articles for the local newspaper's Sunday magazine. I mostly write books these days, but I still write the occasional magazine piece. They've been run in Outside, National Geographic, New Scientist, Wired, the New York Times, as well as many others too embarrassing to name. In 1985, an article of mine called How to Win at Germ Warfare was a National Magazine Award finalist. And in 1996, my article on earthquake-proof bamboo houses took the Engineering Journalism Award in the General Interest Magazine category, which, I must be honest, was the only entrant. I often write about science, although I have no science degree and must fake my way through interviews with experts I can't understand. I also read books for the New York Times. My first book, Stiff, was an offshoot of a column I wrote for Salon. It was a reported humor column where I covered things like vaginal weightlifting and amputee bowling leagues and the question of how much food it takes to burst a human stomach. I have no hobbies. I mostly work on my books and hang out with my family and friends. I enjoy bird watching, though the hours don't agree with me, backpacking, thrift stores, overseas supermarkets, Scrabbles, mangoes, and that late-night Animal Planet show about horrific animals, such as the parasitic worm that attaches itself to fish's eyes, but makes up for it by leading the blind fish around. So that's Mary Roach. She's an odd little birdie, is about the only way that I can put it. So I kind of went through, I've read this book before. So this time I went through trying to figure out why I liked it so much that in fact, it's one of those nonfiction books that has stuck with me. The first thing that I come back to over and over again, which I can't deny, is the humor. Like, Donna talks about it being laugh out loud. Like, it truly is one of the few books I can think of where I have literally actually laughed out loud or snorted. It's the kind of book that if you have someone else in your house who's not reading it, you're constantly saying, oh, wait, hang on, let me read you this one little bit. Oh, wait, hang on, let me read you this one little bit, until the person says they're just going to read it themselves. Sorry about that. So the humor is number one, the thing that I like best about it. I think the second thing, which I think works particularly for kind of science or the articles that she's talking about, is that she's asking the questions that I think I would want to ask, but I would be afraid to ask, or I would be intimidated to ask. You two stop playing handsies in the corner. You think we can't see you? Because we can. So she asked the things that I would want to ask, or that I might be embarrassed to ask. And because maybe she's not coming from a science background, she has this really odd and unusual way of putting everything that just made it something that I just really, really enjoyed. The third thing that I came up with is I just like her sheer excitement to know stuff. Like, she just has this passion for learning, and she's just kind of fascinated by the stuff that she sees and that she's reading about. And because she's excited about it, I find myself being excited about it. So for example, here she's talking about physiological reactions during coitus. So there's a picture of a bed in a small experimental room. On the bed are a man and a woman. They are making the familiar movements made by millions of other couples in bed that night, and yet they look nothing like those couples. They have EKG wires leading from their thighs and arms like a pair of lustful marionettes who have managed to escape the puppet show and check into a cheap motel. So I don't know if I ever would have come up with that description, but I can't tell you how much I wish that I had. And her ability to just kind of, she goes down these little various rabbit holes. So one thing sparks her interest, and then the next chapter takes off as she's going on by that. And I think that's something that appeals to me, because I think it was you, Kit, who said, like, I learned so much. Like, and you learned all these things that, one, you never knew that you didn't know, or that you actually had an interest in knowing. And it's the kind of thing that I think I was always attracted as a kid to, those articles, like weird and unusual facts. I remember when I was researching a book, this is years ago, and I still remember it, but that more people are killed by falling vending machines, so they're crushed to death, like by trying to fish out a Diet Coke, than are killed in shark attacks. And I don't know where I particularly learned this factoid, but I find it still endlessly fascinating. And I still, to this day, don't get something out of a vending machine without thinking, whoop, careful. Because I don't know why. It just strikes my interest and strikes my fancy. And this book is full of every one of those kinds of little odd facts. The fourth one I have, which I think I know the answer to it. I was curious how, if anyone else was surprised by how involved she got in the research. So as Donna spoiled the surprise of you who don't know, she has sex with her husband in an MRI machine, so that they can, basically scientists can look at that. You're going to add something, Donna?
Oh, no. I was just going to say delighted was my, I don't know if I was surprised, but I was absolutely delighted at how she put herself right in there.
And it's not just that, like, she has this whole other scene where they're talking about, how a woman basically becomes moist. There's everyone's favorite word, moist. And whether or not, like, that's not necessarily driven, which I did know is not necessarily driven by just sexual excitement. That is, that your body will respond, even if in fact, like, for example, in a rape or an assault situation, your body will still respond. And it's in no means meaning that you're like, I'm really kind of into this. And she actually participates in a study where she talks about, she has something inserted, and then they have her watching odd travel documentaries to see if anything happens, and then having her watch pornography to see if anything happens. And through the whole thing, they're measuring basically what's happening. And I just thought to myself, I just don't know if I would have that kind of dedication to a study or to something where I was like, oh, I really want to know how they do this. So I guess I'll participate. But the fact that she is willing to kind of do that, I think makes her stuff just, again, much more interesting and accessible. I have to give a call out. I've just been scrolling along to other favorite lines. So this is a line that I so badly want to steal for a book at some point. So she basically writes a letter to Virginia Johnson's son, who Masters and Johnson. And she's looking for this. Apparently there was an artificial, basically coitus machine. And so she really wanted to get a peek at this thing. And they were basically denying it to her. And so she's like, I just want to see the machine, some footage of the machine. No reply. I phoned again. Scott gave me the sort of hello that very badly wants to be a goodbye, which I thought is just such a perfect line, and it just worked. Another great line. She goes to this basically conference where people have built all these various sex machines. And so she's talking about most of them are built by men. And so they're primarily focused on penetration, which of course she goes into a whole thing around. That's probably not the be all end all for women. Someone has plugged in a homemade machine on the floor behind Archibald. The motor housing is the size of a lunchbox, and it is raised on one end like a slide projector. A flesh-colored phallus on a stick slides quietly in and out. The erotic appeal seems limited to me. It would be like dating a corn dog. Which again, come on, that's pretty good. Another one of these machines has basically, you have the option to add pubic hair to it. At the base of the penile assembly was a wide black wiry cuff of, quote, fur-like or hair-like material for the unpartnerless woman who wants not only the ultimate climax or orgasm, but also the feeling that she's having sex with a shoe buffer. See, I warned you it was laugh out loud funny. Like, she's got some really great stuff in here. A lot of some of the best bits were in footnotes that she had. So I would encourage people to make sure that you read the footnotes, because I think if you don't, you're actually missing some of the best parts of this.
I think I screenshotted every single footnote to keep as a reference of how to write a good footnote. Like, they're brilliant. They're brilliant.
I think it's a good example. There's a couple books, I've actually seen it done occasionally in fiction, where you see footnotes as humorous asides. And sometimes I find it annoying in a physical book if you have to flip to the back. Like, it depends how they're laid out in the actual text. I do like on an ebook, you just basically press the thing and it pops right open on your digital. How is it handled in the audiobook, Kim? It
was wonderful. Right away, as soon as she must have numbered where you saw it in the book, Sandra Burr was the actress, and she would just say footnote. Like, so I read something this morning about different kinds of intercourse, and so, anal, or no, not anal. So that was in the footnote. Whatever. I can't. Her list of different
of options.
Yeah, options, and then the narrator would just say footnote, not anal, or something like that. And it was really well done.
Mm-hmm. Well, I read it in a print book, not in ebook, yeah. and the footnotes were actually on the page, so yeah. they were
below.
Really, yeah,
on the lower part.
Not
of the
end
page.
Notes, but actual footnotes. So it worked beautifully. Oh. Yeah.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
So another great line, I've just been scrolling through to share them with you, some of my favorites. So she goes off to China, where she's looking at stuff happening with erectile dysfunction. And again, not only am I surprised at the stuff that she gets herself into, but the stuff that she's actually able to see. And this is no doubt, she's a New York Times bestseller, so I'm sure if she calls you up and it's in your area of science, you're very interested to share it with her. But she's basically talking about impotence. And there's this fellow who is impotent and is being seen by the doctor. The quote, "The dysfunctional penis is in the spotlight this morning. It's been so for the last 8 years of the 47. The patient has tried Viagra with limited success. The organ sits alone on its little skin stage looking vulnerable. I find myself feeling nervous for it, as one might for a fifth grader before a solo recital." Like, come on, that's just, I don't write about penis, but if I did, I would so wish that I had written that. So that was one thing I liked. I have to say, and it strikes me as interesting, and I think it's a testament to her, is in general, for years I didn't read nonfiction, and I'm curious, kind of show of hands, how many of you guys are big nonfiction readers? I wasn't till probably about maybe 5 or 7 years ago is when I started to pick up and read more nonfiction. And I don't know if that was, I just needed a break from university. So because I'd been in university for so long, anything that was nonfiction felt like it was assigned homework. But I also do think it was the fact, I think nonfiction has just become so good. So much of what is happening in nonfiction, I think, is just really, really well written. And a lot of it feels very novel-like. I don't know if you guys read Eric Larson, but like Devil in the White City, Thunderstruck. Those, if you love murder mysteries, like those are spectacular nonfiction murder mysteries. You know, I've read several about kind of, because of course I like murder. So, you know, things happening in Victorian England and the rise of detectives. And but I tend to read a lot of nonfiction that reads almost more like a novel. So it's very, you know, what they would call now narrative nonfiction. So this is a real break from that, because this is much more in a lot of ways like a textbook. There's chapters on different topics. They're backed up with research and then it's on to the next topic. But I think it's just her delight in kind of reading about it and her humor that just makes it work. So Donna, you talked about the part that stuck out in your memory. Kit, was there anything in for you that really popped up for you, that really struck you?
In terms of topics?
Yes. Ignore the other two who are laughing like junior high girls.
Yeah. I did find that it was interesting about the pill. The pill, when you take it as a young girl, it's almost menopausal.
It reduces libido.
Yes. Well, I didn't know that.
I didn't either.
There's so many things I didn't know that I now know. I think that was a highlight. I don't know, just everything. There was a show on Netflix about Johnson and Masters and Johnson. Did anyone else see it?
No.
Oh, it's very good. And she did a nice job at reviewing their work and that kind of thing. It's a very good show. I wish I knew the name.
I vaguely remember hearing about this. It was like kind of a docudrama, wasn't it? Like it wasn't like a straight nonfiction documentary, I don't think.
It wasn't a straight strict documentary. No, it was a dramatized about that time. And you know, for all of us who remember the 70s and stuff, it's a riot what they've got in the show to remind you of childhood. But
yeah, I think one of the things that I found really interesting and that she talked about was kind of like the role of history in sort of studying sex. And like in the 1920s, they were doing a lot of stuff that they then basically nobody would touch with a stick for like a long period of time, because it was considered taboo, or that wasn't what we talked about, or those kinds of stuff. So like kind of in the 50s and 60s, nobody was having any of this research. And then it kind of started back up again with Masters and Johnson. But what I found, I guess, sad, but probably not surprising, is how much stuff is still not talked about. And how much these researchers have to be so careful with how they're framing things. Like when you think about the fact of, present company excluded as newly divorced, most people are having sex And most people are, doing this kind of thing. It's something that we don't talk about. And it's all this kind of thing like, oh, well, you can't study that. And yet it's such a huge part of our emotional functioning, our psychological functioning, and how little we know about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I certainly have had conversations with teen girls and just stuff like that where, how much a lot of young women don't even know about their own bodies, how much young men don't know about, young men, maybe older men too, I don't know, about women's bodies and about how they work and what's happening with that. I had a discussion with someone else. We were talking about this book, and I was saying how, I found it sad that we're still not able to kind of openly talk about this kind of topic without even these are researchers, right? They're not giggling kind of things. But, they were trying to figure this stuff out. And she talked about, look at where we are, where when there's, advertising pads or tampons, they're still using a blue gel. Because, God forbid that you even think about what's actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, Bonnie, there is a chapter that deals with about whether or not the sexual discharge is urine or not urine and all of that kind of stuff. So it's really kind of interesting. When you say baby, Donna, what are you going for?
Oh, no, we've come a long way, baby. Like that's just that expression where you come. Was it in this book that I read about, you were just talking about the risks involved in some of the research, and I've read I've read a lot about sex and sex research in the last couple of years. Was it she who was writing about universities having to kind of fudge what they were studying because
it won't be approved? So she has, of course I can't find them now because I'll never find them because I'm looking for it. She has the links of some of the titles that they come up for their research projects, which are you have to sit them down and break them into smaller and smaller chunks to make sense of them. Right. Because if they said it straightforward, it would be a problem.
Right. Was there something about female orgasm or something? Why would you want to? I don't remember. Anyway, it was kind of quite disheartening, actually, that part of it.
Yeah. So I think there was a lot for me in this book that stuck out. There was a lot that was funny. I found another funny line. She's talking about early in the Greeks' research of sex. And so when they were looking at contraceptive in Greek times, many women were told to wear a piece of cat liver attached to their left foot. And she writes back, I suppose this might well keep you from getting pregnant in the same way that wearing Birkenstocks might. So it probably does work. You don't get pregnant because no one wants to have sex with the lady with the cat liver tied around her ankle. So I think that works out. So this is my way of saying, I think this is a great example if people are looking, particularly if anyone wanted to do magazine type articles, this would be a great thing to look at in terms of voice. When people say, what is voice? This is a prime example. If you read a Mary Roach book and you pick up another, you will recognize her. It's distinctive.
You know what? I just in advance of this meeting, I picked up Spook, which is that's what Spook looks like, and I read the introduction, and it was it's Mary Roach. The introduction it's the same, except this is about afterlife instead of sex, and I've already laughed out loud once just in the introduction. Yeah, she's just fabulous.
She has voice, and I think if you were trying to do kind of medium length, medium being the format, not medium sized, but blog articles, you could do far worse than kind of trying to echo what she's doing, because they're bite sized and they're very useful. Hang on, I'm going to cough up a lot. I do have to warn people, I think it would be hard to sell a book proposal of this, just because it really does rely on voice. And I think what made the difference for her is that she had sold several article length pieces before she sold her first book. And I think that would be the way to go about if you were trying to do something like this. But I think she's a prime example of, when you think of platform and all that, she's not a scientific background. This is something where this was interesting to her. So I think it's a good thing. If there is a topic or something that you're passionate about, you can make a career out of it. but I think you have to probably go about it in a smart way. And I don't think she would have had easy success if she had written this as a book and had taken it out to peddle it. I think she did better because she had articles that were award-winning and were popular, and it was kind of clear that there was going to be a market for this. Okay.
In a way, it seems like she's taken taboo subjects from our society and dived into them. But I think a publisher might wonder if it was going to be offensive. But I didn't find this offensive. Of course, there were parts. I mean, the parts of the panties, stained panties, and the smell of vagina and stuff. Believe me, I'm afraid to even tell you guys about the book because Leslie and Bonnie haven't read it, and it sounds like really weird, but it's wonderful, but weird. She talks about how much better homosexual sex is than heterosexual sex, because, especially for women. I mean, she had a women focus in this book, don't you think?
Yeah. Well, and I think, because Bonnie's making that face, she's like, nuh-uh, which is huge kudos to Bonnie's husband. But what they're saying is, I think, and she makes the argument, and it's really lovingly put, is that the best sex comes when people are talking, and that they're communicating what they like and what they don't like. And that homosexual sex has the benefit of, I have these parts too. So I already have a sense of what works for me. And so if I was with another woman, then I can sort of take that and I kind of know what's going to work out. And she actually talks about, like men have a problem that if a woman is giving them a hand job, that they're frequently not firm enough. Because if you ever watch, a guy give himself, masturbate, they basically are trying to choke the thing like it took money from them, right? Like it is a violent, harsh thing that is happening there, right? Whereas women, I think, because that's generally not what we're looking for, we tend to be like, okay, I can help you out with that a little bit. And we don't know. And again, for a guy, then I think they're trying to figure out what it is that they like, which could be why they focus so much on penetration. Which again, for women is often not where the real action is.
Yeah. Well, and that was an interesting part of the book when they talked about the difference, that, how close your clitoris was to your vagina and the success of orgasm as a result. It was all very interesting. I did know that, there was a lot I did know. So the things that I knew, I thought she just wrote with flair and funny.
I actually didn't know that about the distance between your clitoris.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
Either. Oh,
and
okay.
I did. What I loved is it was Bonaparte's wife.
Oh yeah.
Who figured it out because she was not having good sex, and so she was the one. Like we're talking, French Revolution time period, like what's not working for me? And I like kind of this version of her, like with her little fancy French ruler, like, aha, this is why it's working for these people and not for me. I just found that so many very interesting little things that I think would spur discussion and all kinds of stuff. So that is my very long-winded way of saying I give the book a huge thumbs up, which is why I picked it. I'm hoping to introduce other people are going to watch this later, and they will either be appalled or very intrigued. If sex isn't your thing, that's fair enough. She does, as I mentioned, talk about a lot of, and I think you put it well, Kit, taboo subjects.
Mm-hmm.
Well, which other of her books have you read, Eileen? And Kit?
I have read all of them myself because I really like her. I would say Stiff is one of my favorites, which is about what happens to cadet. Like the opening scene is her at this medical convention where everyone unwraps this head. So they're all going to be doing this dissection. So there's like just picture like the Surrey conference, only in front of everybody having a notebook. Everybody has this decapitated head in front of them. And she goes through this whole thing about like, where do these heads come from? And like, the whole kind of thing behind it, which I just, again, like I never had wondered about it until I read that scene, but then I wondered. Something like Packing for Mars is less probably taboo and controversial, but she gets into all the stuff like how do you pee in space and what happens if you pee in space and She actually talks about, can you have sex in space and what would happen if you did that? So she does look at kind of, again, all the things that you might want to know. Gulp is everything you wanted to know and didn't want to know about how digestion worked. The one I found kind of maybe, I don't know if I want to say most disturbing, is the one called Grunt. And that's about humans at war. And she really kind of dives into the psychology about how do you train someone to kill someone, which is what the military is about. Like, how do you make that happen? And what is the psychology of what you need to do in order for people to be able to take those things and then to actually function beyond that? And she gets into, you know, what happens if you're a scientist who's creating weapons, you know, with the express purpose of destroying people and life. And how do you deal and cope with that? So that was the one I maybe found most disturbing. But for someone else may not be. So that is my spiel for everyone to check out. Stiff. Very different nonfiction selection. But I think that's partially why I picked it, is I wanted something that was a little bit unique. And I would encourage everyone to give it a check. Other thoughts or comments?
When I grow up, I want to write like Mary Roach.
No, you want to write like Donna.
I used to think I want to grow up and be more like AJ Jacobs, but I think yeah.
I think you could do worse than making her a role model, like in terms of her
the accessible. And I didn't know she didn't have a science background, but that makes a whole lot of sense to me because she is so accessible.
Yeah, it's like your best friend telling you stuff. Like, it reminds me of when I was in like elementary school, and Holly Heron, that I went to high school with, brought her mom's copy of The Joy of Sex to our Catholic school, and we all, like, you know, clustered around in the girls' bath. Like, it's like someone, you know, explaining things to you that you're kind of like, you're laughing and giggling and all that kind of stuff, but it, like, oh, I really wanted to know this thing. So that's, I think, what makes it kind of fun. So
with all the topics of her books, I would wonder how quirky she is as a friend, or as a
pretty weird.
Yeah, I'm thinking pretty weird. So Donna, maybe you might not want to be exactly like her in every way.
Have you seen the people I hang out with? Look at Connie and Leslie. I think they'd still be friends with me.
Oh, good.
Yeah, you'd be all right there. There's some odd ducks, those too. She's a very fun person to follow on Twitter. She's also very accessible on Twitter. Like, I have written to her like on Twitter and been like, you know, just read your last book, loved it. And she's almost every time tweeted back like, so glad, blah, blah, blah. So she's a very accessible writer. So if you have specific questions or a topic you think she should tackle, I think she'd actually probably be interested to hear it. I think she is probably a pretty quirky bird. But my kind of quirky bird, like, I think this is the kind of person I would like to know, because I just have a feeling like you'd be a glass of wine in and she'd be like, so did you know your nipples did this or whatever? And I'd be like, no. And she would just launch into this whole thing. And I would know all sorts of stuff.
Well, you would know about dead bodies, poo.
Yeah.
Ghosts. Sex. Killing machines.
Oh yeah, everything. Like, she'd be an endless source of good cocktail conversation. This is my kind of person.
Totally.
All right. Well, everyone, have yourselves a lovely Monday evening. I had to think of what day of the week it is.
Thank you for doing nonfiction.
Yeah, it was kind of like I wanted to do something a little different. So my next one will be a fiction one again, because then I can dig in a little bit more on crafty things. Then it's a little harder for me to do with the nonfiction. Other than with this one, I just, again, if anyone ever says, I don't know what voice is, this is it. This is it. This is one of the better examples, I think, of voice on the page. So kudos to Mary Roach.
Thank you. That was very interesting discussion.
Yeah, no, I want to read this book. Yeah,
you really do. Like, if you like, and if sex isn't your thing, and hey, no problem if it isn't. check out one of her other books because they're definitely well worth a read.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, it's my bedtime, ladies.